baseball player, that if you're successful 3 times out of 10, you go for the Hall of Fame. But in the period after World War II, where the capitalist classes in Europe came out of World War II weak and discredited from their association with fascism, the bourgeois class in the U.S. came out stronger than ever, and ironically sanitized by the role that they played in the war. So they beat us. What we got instead was the collective bargaining regime, and the system of employer-provided benefits. The tremendous growth of private home ownership that was ultimately a subsidy from the federal government to the construction industry and realtors. In the middle 60s, there was a similar moment with the discovery of poverty as a special condition, and a movement further in liberal intellectual society and the policymaking world further to discredit racism, right, or racial injustice. The punchline is black power emerged out of a moment at which it seemed that it was clear to many people that the objectives of the civil rights movement had been won and weren't fully adequate.
Did the Black Panthers, I mean, they were one of the more interesting groups, at one stage even considering creating some ways to be one.
That's what I came out of. I mean, not the Panthers per se, but like that was my formative politics, right? In fact, like I discovered you, like in the New Revolutionaries, right, like in '68. But the problem, right? Just as one gets older, it seems the fruit tasted better in one's youth, though it may have. The more that moment, with the Panthers in particular, seems to feel like a path tragically not taken, right? But here's the problem. And I mean, there's another conversation to have here about like a strain of historical scholarship that I think is wrong and problematic on epistemic and interpretivist grounds, but that's probably another story. But the problem is that the radicals, and I say this as having been one of them, that the radicals never really had purchase of more than a toenail, right, and a fractured toenail at that, of influence in actually existing black politics. But as more and more of the radicals began to see the limitations of black power as an ideology, right, and a program, they began to undergo periods of ideological development or purification, right? But the problem was not so much how those positions differed, although we fought it out among ourselves, certainly, but the biggest problem was what they shared. And what they shared was an approach to understanding politics that did have more to do with a religion and a religious faith than it did with direct, sort of hard-headed analysis of the world as we saw it and the changes that were actually taking place in really existing black politics, right? And understanding that the project of movement building combined proselytizing, like a street corner preacher, right, to win adherents, and waiting for the moment, right, the crash, the apocalypse, whatever, right, the millenarian moment when the revolution comes, right? Even, songs of the era, when the revolution comes.
It's no surprise that quite a lot of these people ended up in the Democratic Party.
Right.
Ended up, getting, I mean, like Jesse Jackson, the best known amongst them, setting up the Rainbow Coalition. The minute the coalition collapses, or he doesn't take it further, or doesn't want it to be outside the Democrats, he basically, Manning Marable said this to me in so many words, effectively does a deal with the Democratic Party machine, who pay off all his debts, and in return he becomes a loyal supporter of any leader. You know, so it's a sad business, and this has now become institutionalized.
Right. No, no, absolutely. And look, I mean, the thing that always just blew me away about the Jackson phenomenon was that um, it there was never any doubt about what Jesse Jackson was, right? I mean, he he would never have been part of organizing a genuinely left or broad political coalition because his sole political commitment has always been the advancement of Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
And as early as 1970, he had said basically, well, not basically, he said actually he wanted to be recognized as a new Booker T. Washington, basically, after about a year or two after King's death, which was a role that hadn't really existed, right? But so there's that. And I mean, a problem that we've had consistently, right? And I think us Altacockers have our own versions of it that are especially bad, is that not wanting to face up to the limitations of our power and influence as a left, and a kind of wishful thinking, right? I've described it sometimes as the myth of the spark, right? That some event, some personality is going to come along and presto, right? I mean, things will happen, things will fall into place. And people tend to sacralize the insurgencies of the 1960s so much now that there's no, that we don't engage in the kind of critical examination that we should as militants. And this is probably like an old man's rant, right? I mean, also, but increasingly to me, right, one of the key fault lines in sort of left of center politics is that which separates what I consider dilettantes from people I consider militants, right? And politics isn't about feeling good about yourself. Politics isn't about trying to find, an appealing history that you can hold on to in the dark night, right? I mean, people, and there may be a bit of a generational thing about this. I mean, I think people like from our era are not surprised at all about the possibility that the military is going to take power in Brazil. And we're not surprised at all, to be honest, that at the slightly less infelicitous reality that the PSUV's connections to the military are probably the only reason that they haven't been taken down in Venezuela.
The other point which you've often made in your essays, Adolf, is that if it wants to be, effectively, this is what you've said, but correct me if I'm wrong, that capitalism can be, if it wants to be, gender blind and race blind. It doesn't need any of that for its functioning. It doesn't need discrimination against women, or against black people, or against gay people, or against anyone else. It's not capitalism that does that. In other words, these problems and discriminations can be perfectly well solved within the system. I mean, one example of this, for instance, is if you look at how gay people were treated historically over the centuries. I mean, homosexuality was illegal till the mid-60s in most parts of the Western Christian world. And today, if anyone opposes gay marriages, everyone screams at them saying, so all this can be changed without affecting how the system functions in terms of what its real needs are.
Right. No, absolutely. No, I couldn't have put it more sharply myself. And the extent therefore to which the sole actionable form of inequality that exists in either bourgeois practice or left discourse, ironically, now is disparity, right? Racial disparity, gender disparity, or whatever, then that is at best, right, the sort of left wing, the sort of critical left self-consciousness of neoliberalism. But but it's a metric of injustice that depends upon and exists entirely within the bourgeois framework. I mean, again, as my friend Walter Michaels has put it pretty eloquently over and over again, and I quote him a lot on this, that if the ideal, well, the substantive ideal, right, of that perspective of social justice is that a society in which 1% of the population controls 90% of the stuff that there is to control can be just, providing that in the U.S., 12% of the 1% are black, 14% are Latino, it's half women, and whatever the appropriate percentage of gays and lesbians would be. It's probably a myth, but there's a story I've heard for a long time that when the Cubans came to power in the 60s, they took the philosophers out of the University of Havana and elsewhere and trained them as artificial inseminators for the cattle production effort. And I say if it's not true, it should be.
Well, I mean, the other big example, of course, is that you can get trapped. Obviously, you would agree that we defend people against all oppressions, goes without saying. That's not at issue. But the sort of movements that grew up during the Obama campaign didn't last long. The only reason they grew up is he was a pretty effective speaker, though what he said was usually quite vapid. But he was a person of color. And having a person of color in the White House, people thought on its own would change things.
Right. No, I know. It was extraordinary to watch, right? I mean, it definitely was. I mean, I've often said that it can be more important to be in the right place at the right time and pay attention than to be smart or perceptive. And I just happened to live in that state Senate district that Obama came out of when he was emerging. So I got to see.
This is Chicago.
Yeah. I mean, I was in the birthing room basically, and was close to his predecessor in his seat, and was part of the negotiations about his replacement of her and the like. And it was just fascinating because, in fact, I even made a reference to it in a Village Voice article, a column that I wrote like at the beginning of 1996, and I didn't mention his name because nobody would have known him because he was nobody. But he was so obviously an Ivy League financial sector foundation world confection with like nothing there.
That was obvious even then.
Yeah, no, right. I mean, it clearly, right? And so from that perspective, like it was interesting to watch his invention. And I've often pointed out to people that in 2008, Obama got more Wall Street money than any other candidate. And they often enough look sheepish because they don't want to, because they know what the implications are, but they don't want to face up to them, right? And I mean, you remember, of course, that when he met with the big the Wall Street investment bankers after the crash,
they were amazed.
And he said to them, I'm all that stands between you and the pitchforks, right? And if we want to understand why Trump is in the White House now, that story and stories like that and Obama's identitarianism are as much a part of the story as anything else is.
No, well, I mean, the big talk at the time he was in the White House for 8 years was that we now live in a post-racial society. Right. And that so-called post-racial society, then it elects a white supremacist as president of the United States. I mean,
and part of the thing too is like the post-racialism thing. There was like no social issue, no political matter, right? No class contradiction, no social danger that academics cannot turn into raw material for their own career advancement. And it's and it's really, man, I tell you, I've been at this a long time, granted, but it just seems to get worse and worse. That So the whole post racialism thing. I mean, this is a debate that has come around like in different guises since the first waves of black elected officials started to get elected in the 70s. Um, and and when you stop and ask yourself, well, I mean, what the hell could that even possibly mean, right? So now we have the emergence of um, of vapid autodidact like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who sort of trades on this empty debate and is like, and, and it seems to me that he speaks both to that strain of the people of color, the professional managerial class, for whom racial affront or racial identity is a form of capital, basically, and it is like in a lot of industries, as well as for those white liberals, ironically, who want to feel good about themselves for feeling bad about how bad things are in the world. Um, the punchline is that there's no way to counter it, right? I mean, there's nothing to do except to feel bad and maybe utter Protestant moments of public confession, and then go on about your business. And
But Adolf, even you, uh, sort of ultra critical of many of the things going on, did get quite enthused by the campaign that Bernie Sanders waged against the Democratic Party machine. I mean, we were here watching these huge rallies, mixed rallies. Even when Bernie didn't speak, someone else spoke. She was brilliant. I mean, it's a real moment, I think, in recent American history where you feel something bubbling up.
Yep. No, I agree. And I worked in the campaign until the end, actually, and around the country. So I got to see a lot of it. I worked a lot in South Carolina, for instance. But yeah, no, that's right. And there's something there. And I think that the big thing now should be, right, the debate for between left and right that overlaps the Democratic Party boundaries going forward. A friend of mine just sent me today a resolution that the International Longshore Workers Union just passed as an international to reach out to the 5 other unions that endorsed Bernie to begin discussions now about creating something else, right? And I understand the resolution was modified, which has to happen, but it makes a reference to the 8 unions that came together to form the CIO in the mid-1930s. And I mean, this is something that those of us in and around the labor movement have been trying to work on for decades now. And this looks hopeful. I mean, it's interesting to see, for instance, how the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party and the identitarian wing of the Democratic Party are coming together now. And this has been clear since before the election, to form a bloc that, among other things, is red baiting constantly, right? I mean, I was struck to see how many of them have projected like the following logic. Sanders stands for economic redistribution and calls for identification with the interests of the working class. Trump calls for catering to the concerns of the white working class. Therefore, Sanders is the same thing as Trump, but even beyond Sanders, therefore, calling for economic redistribution is by definition a cover for racism. So, but it's good to know who the enemies are, right? I mean, and how people line up.
And Trump, of course, made a mockery of everything he'd said on this question within weeks. I mean, the big thing was that I'm going to clear the swamp of Wall Street. and the swamp moved into the White House. And on many other issues as well, just shameless. The tax cuts for the rich. So I think his time is, hopefully up if there is a candidate who can take him on. Now, do you think Bernie is going to try and get the nomination for the next time?
Right now, I think so.
You
Yeah.
think he will?
Yeah.
Well, I think he's going to try. Yeah, and I think the other side is already trying to organize against him. But I really think that the most important work is going to be done at the state level, between now and a year from now, right? And I mean that's where either old coalitions need to be broadened, and or new ones need to be developed, because as my old friend and comrade Anthony Mazzocchi said often, neither Democrats nor the Republicans have anything credible to offer working people of whatever genders, sexual orientations, or races and ethnicities who are becoming more and more precarious, who are suffering more and more. And in the absence of their having anything to offer, then that's a space, he always said, could be filled by forces with with a much nastier analyses and programs, and that's kind of where we are now. I don't think that winning back committed Trump supporters is a profitable undertaking, but there were between 6.5 and over 9 million people who voted for Trump, who had also voted for Sanders and voted for Obama at least once.
Yeah.
And you've got to assume
This is
that
in the Rust Belt, mainly.
right. No, that's right, exactly. And you've got to assume that a lot of those people voted for something they thought they were going to get, which is not the thing that they got. And I think that's that's a crucial population for us to speak to. And I don't mean target like in the way the pollsters target. I mean to craft a political economic agenda that addresses them, because what both the left identitarians, and I'll toss the Black Lives Matter people in there too, want us all to forget that blacks are disproportionately working class also, and Latinos are disproportionately working class, and women are disproportionately working class, and gays and lesbians are disproportionately in the working class. And I think that's where our focus has to be.
Understood. Last question.
Thank you very much for having me, by the way.
No, it's a great pleasure. Do you think it's possible that Trump could be elected again, despite?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Yeah, I do. Yep, I do. I mean, a lot of it has to do with what the Democrats do and don't do. A lot of it has to do with other things that break over the next couple of years. I watched a couple of minutes of CBS Morning News today, and I saw a reporter talking to a soybean farmer in Illinois about who's a Trump supporter, Trump voter, and he's still a Trump supporter. And he acknowledged that farmers, the big generic, are taking it on the chin now, right, because of the tariff war, but he nonetheless supports Trump even before the $12 billion bailout, because he thinks it's going to pay off in the long run. But the point is, though, that the offering of empty hope, right, about payoffs coming down the road, and the classic fascist impulse of deflecting every criticism by turning it by the combination of the big lie and scapegoating. And by the way, this guy and his whole administration fit the profile of a fascist agitator with uncomfortable truth. But I think it's possible, like, for him to play this out, until after November. And I think that's partly because the liberals are looking in the wrong places for trying to challenge him, right? And that's again because they they are just as committed to defeating the emergence of a political, economically grounded left as the right wing are. And I think it's more and more important for our side to take that into account too. But yeah, I think it's entirely possible he could win again.
Adolf Reed, great pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
Oh, it's all mine. Thank you very much, Tariq. And I trust at some point we'll be able to do it in person.
I hope so.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on TeleSUR.
Bienvenidos a su trinchera para la defensa de la madre tierra, Zona Verde.
Welcome to your Trends for the Defense of Mother Earth, Green Zone. I am Madeleine Garcia. I'm from La Gran Sabana, an ancient land of the indigenous in Venezuela. I invite you to accompany us during this whole hour loaded with the best environmental information.
Y sobre todo de la energía que siento aquí y comparto desde esta tierra mágica.
La madre naturaleza tiene un inmenso poder.
Mother Nature has an immense power, as it gives off beautiful landscape, fertile total innovation. It also creates its spaces, many of them invited by humanity and invention. All of them phenomena that require great reflection because without it, the creation wouldn't be possible.
No sería posible la creación.
Remember that we have our social network at your disposal to send us your feedback. We are on Twitter at Zona Verde TeleSUR, on Facebook at Zona Verde TeleSUR, and our email is zonaverde@telesur.net. Let's take a close look at the highlight of the quiz.
La alcaldesa de París, Anne Hidalgo, participó en una Belarusian.
The mayor's Paris, Anne Hidalgo, participated in a Belarusian cycler demonstration with the aim of reducing the use of the cars and promoting non-pollution mobility. The activity was carried out in the framework of the campaign for re-election in office. Hidalgo, the first female mayor in history of Paris, has managed to get the French capital to exceed 1,000 kilometers of cycleways, making the reduction of the circulation of vehicles one of the pillars of his mandate. Some will say that later the city still needs to be built around the private helmet and polluted car. We know that this is not the model we want. The most citizens want this model, which will be the hegemony model that exists, of the glorious theories that weren't not glorious, and the city organized around the car and a model that no longer correspond to a party at all. There is no city in the world for which it is attractive to base its model on car.
Con la aparición de la COVID-19, los
With
planes de
the
transformación
emergence
de
of the
la movilidad de la
COVID-19 plan to
alcaldía
transfer the
parisina
mobility of the
tomaron un
Parisian
gran
lateral
impulso para
property to the
garantizar
Great
medios de
Falls to
transporte
ensure
sanitariamente
sanitary
seguros.
safe
A
transport.
finales de
At
abril,
the end of the
la
April,
alcaldesa
the
anunció un
mayor
gasto de
announced a
300
spend of
millones de euros
300
para
million
habilitar
euros to
ciclovías
enable
temporales y
temporary and
permanentes
permanent
encima de las
cycleways
líneas del
uptown
metro
of
más
the busy
concurridas en
subway
el marco de un
live
nuevo
under a
plan de
new
movilidad
post-confinement
post-confinamiento.
mobility plan. In the Great Theatre of the Liceo of Barcelona in Spain, the concert of the BSN was presented, an artist's proposal dedicated to an audience of 2,294 flutes. These were able to enjoy the spectacle sitting in the seats of one of the most prestigious theatres in Europe. This symbolic action was convinced by the artist Eugenio Ampuero, who argued is to function as a starting point to reformulate the present by putting nature as a center.
I believe that it has also been shown that we are at the end of an entire era, and that means that certain paradigms must be changed. We do not live in the same world that 90 days ago confined us, and this significant fact has to be reflected in everything we do.
The concert was held on the end of the Aller State, making the end of the confinement and the beginning of what has been called the new normal. With the third BSN, we want to consider an alternative to the concept of Anthropocene, which refers to the historical period focused on the alteration of the planet by man. The BSN appeals to start an era that will place the light of all living beings, human and not human, at the center of the new state from the planet. 3 ways to recycle plastic bottles at home. Cut an empty bottle and use it as a plug to grow plants. You can sketch an animal figure before cutting and painting it, making it a nice design. Transfer a soda bottle into a plant shower. You only have to open 5 holes to the lid of the container, filling with water and use it for irrigation. With a white Baines bottle made and homogeneous napkin holder, trim the bottle with a design that fits the napkin that you use frequently and decor it.
De fondo, muy cerca de mí, pareciera que lo pudiera tocar con las manos.
A beautiful rainbow behind me.
Tiene que ver con lo que les voy a decir ahorita. Estamos muy
So,
cerca de la
Brazil
fecha
has become the new epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic.
pandemia por el COVID-19 en Sudamérica.
The situation is particularly seriously in the Brazilian Amazon,
Simultáneamente se ha registrado un aumento de la
where simultaneously there has been an increase in illegal exploitation of its resources,
Al menos 200 ancianos han
raising the risk of contagion throughout the region.
por el coronavirus. Esta situación se ha
The situation has overflowed to the Venezuelan border, particularly affecting the country's limítrofe states.
limítrofes del país. Justamente
In the next report, we will know more about this information.
en el siguiente reporte les ampliamos esta información.
Brasil se encuentra en el segundo lugar a nivel
Brazil ranks second in the world in the countries with the most COVID-19 cases. This June 27 has recorded more than 68,000 deaths and 1,300,000 contagions. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the government of Jair Bolsonaro downplayed the confinement of the virus, leading the country to a dramatic situation which already transcends its border. America should not be underestimated because it has bordered with all the countries of the confinement, St. Chile and Ecuador. This border has become a hotspot of contagion for other countries, leading the neighboring regions of each country to higher contagion rates compared to the rest of their countries. Among their communities most affected are indigenous ones.
In South America, in the Amazon basin, the border territories of Brazil with other countries in the northern part of the Amazon have one of the highest incidence rates of COVID-19.
Amazonas y Roraima, los estados fronterizos brasileños.
Amazon and Roraima, the Brazilian border state, already exceed 80,000 contagions per COVID-19, while Venezuela has recorded of just over 5,000 cases. Both countries share more than 2,200 kilometers of border inhabited mainly by the indigenous communities that are currently being severely affected by the epidemic. According to a figure for the Pan American Health Organization, there are at least 2,000 indigenous people infected in the Amazon River basin. In communication with the different indigenous organizations of Brazil, we know well that we have repeatedly denounced that they have died from COVID-19 because of the neglect by the government of Brazil and Colombia. Many indigenous brothers have died. In the case of the Brazilian, there is a complaint from indigenous organizations that have reported the death of more than 200 indigenous elders.
Manaus in the center right now. Grave is an area that was declared a zone of catastrophe back in Brazil, the same with Boa Vista that are our neighboring states. So if they don't take any forceful action to be able to control and contain the pandemic, we are obligated to think that every person who comes through that border is contaminated.
The spread of COVID-19 has been accelerated by the laxness in the policies of the Brazilian government to advance on the indigenous territories, in addition to the declaration by Minister Ricardo Salles according to the maximized environmental protection. The government enacted on Odyssey that seeks to revert the recognition of indigenous territory. One of the visible consequences of this policy has been the deforestation of indigenous land in protected areas, which increased by the 80% compared to the last year, adding to this invasion of more than 20,000 illegal miners denounced by indigenous leaders acted as a vector of contagion. Here in the municipality of Sao Paulo of Olivença, every day it is there of a people of the Cambeba people. We have not health at all. We have not hospital. We have no oxygen. We are suffering a lot. In the middle of the pandemic, we are threatened with death because of the virus that kills off day by day. We have to fight against the invader of the land. With the catastrophic situation in Brazilian border state, Venezuela has implemented a special care protocol to protect the border population and Venezuela returning to the country. This population in transit is served in the position of integral social care with a protocol that includes the application of the rapid COVID-19 test and the implementation of a preventive quarantine. According to the official figures, between 80% and 90% of the connationals who had returned from Brazil have contracted the virus, and it has been necessary to apply an epidemiological fence at the border.
We make the test, the PCR, that is the ultimate test in the National Institute of Hygiene, Rafael Rangel, and that test let us know if the patient has coronavirus. It is important, very important, this situation, because we made a high number of tests.
Indigenous people and environmental organizations denounce the Brazilian government inaction of the COVID-19. At the same time, point the way that the government of Jair Bolsonaro has taken advantage of the process of the disease to abandon the exploitation of the Amazon. In the face of this alarming situation, indigenous people call on the international community to speak out and ensure measures that urgently protect the affected population and the love of our planet. Time to see the comment of this tweet on the social networks.
Desde Facebook,
From Facebook, Adrianis Belong writes us,
felicitaciones para el equipo de
congratulations
Zona
to the
Verde
Green
y
Zone
todos los que
teams
hacen
and all
posible
who
la
made
realización
possible
de
the
este
realization
maravilloso,
of the wonderful,
excepcional,
exceptional,
educativo e
educational, and
instructivo
instructive program
programa
for
para
each
cada
home,
hogar, creando
creating responsibilities and
responsabilidades y
seeking
procurando
with
con
our
nuestras
actions
acciones
contain the
obtener
healthy
un medio ambiente
environment and
sano y un
sustainable
desarrollo
development.
sostenible.
Thank for
Gracias a sus
teachings,
enseñanzas,
thank for
gracias por
existing.
existir.
En Honduras, la
In Honduras, the pollution of Lake Illoa causes alarm in its habitat. Although it is a protected area since 1978, fishing and obstruction of river by the electrical plant has caused serious pollution of the largest lake in the country. Let's see. For the fishermen's area, who are about 1,200, the situation has become complicated. Fishing are no longer abundant and they have no doubt about the reason of this.
It's because of the pollution on this side of the fish tank and all that, because there are times when there's a lot of wool when the fish leaves. Sometimes there is floating dying fish and we take advantage of those that are still fine.
The Lake of Yohoa has an area of 79 square kilometers and is shared by the three departments. Increased industrial fish population, growth, and commercial activity generate too many nutrients that become a threat.
In the case of Lake Jojoa, there is an overpopulation. There are a few more than 60,000 people living in the protected area. These people, humans including me, what we do is also a consumption of resources.
Lake Jojoa was declared a protected area in 1978. For its preservation, permanent monitoring is carried out, which detect environmental complications caused by the industrial fishing and mining.
Sometimes we have a warmth of 2 meters, 0.5, sometimes of 3, sometimes when there is algae flowering. This tells us that the disk is only 1 meter by the amount of algae that is on the surface of the water.
The growth of the algal and the area is seen by seasons. By this year, this is an increase and alerts the organization responsible for ensuring its preservation.
The Lake of Johoa has been under pressure for many years on the issue of being able to provide nutrients and the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that in one way or another is where the issues of algae proliferates, generates a negative impact on water resources.
The organization defending Lake Yoyoa recommended the regulation of the industrial and tourist exploitation permitted in the region. To reduce pollution in the Lake Yoyoa, and 3 years of treatment is recommended for both industrial and artisanal fishing. Is not taking this measure, biosecurity of this place could be and seriously danger. Gilda Silvestrucci, TeleSUR, Honduras. In this quick environmental data, we tell you about the 5th edition of the International Environment Film Festival that took place between the June 17 and 24 in Argentina. This festival has been held since 2010 and this year for the first time was held in a virtual way. In the following report, we turn more to details. With a 76 short and long short field for 31 countries, this year the main axis of the state is a climate crisis from a human rights perspective. And with former and gender of the most diverse to ensure the plurality of voices in a debate as important as that of the climate crisis that we consider to be very linked to the health emergency that we are living, because it is one of the causes why are reaching this moment of global crisis, and that certainly if we don't change human activity, the system of life, production and consumption, we will not able to avoid having multiples and a future crisis. Through the official website of the festival, you can access the content online and for free. We are committed to giving our space to Argentine production, of course, because of how difficult it is to have exhibition spaces for the entire Latin American industry in terms of independent production out They're that only because of the things don't find an space on international circuit in cinemas. The festival also wants to see an space for these national and Latin American productions so that we can build a fair society through the critical and quality cinema that will help us imagine that type of society we want to build. That's why the proposal also refers thematic workshops where directors tell about their experience. To be able to raise what is happening in Justice One was previously believed that the indigenous population was very close to something much more harmonious with the planet. The people of the communities is not that they enter this chain because they want to, but because they have been forced. The problem faced by Colombia peasants have their place of the finca with the documentary Submerged by the filmmaker Victoria Solano. It is the history of three peasant leaders who, in different ways and from different visions, struggle to protect their land from the advance of mines, and their land is not any land. There are the Moors of Colombia, where comes 80% of the fresh water that Colombia drinks. It is all about on the things that we are fundamental to peasants. For example, to leave the hereditaries, the resistance, to the children to see how they from education use different from some they heritage not only knowledge on the land but knowledge about peace and resistance itself. The film participated in the fifth edition of Finca addressed the environmental problems that the planet faces and at the same time gives voice to the population that is often silent. Carolina Silvestre, TeleSUR. Thinking about the importance of expanding the way we perceive and live nature as a whole, to which we belong, and understanding how human activity in the past it, we present each with the definition of such typical of environmental languages. Today we refer to the word baritone.
Biótopo.
Barotil, geographical space with certain environmental conditions such as soil, water, atmosphere, for the development of their certain animal and plant species. It's time to travel to our green destination. This week we will travel to the Canaima National Park, a nature reserve known for its tepees, cliff and waterfalls like the Terror on the World, Kerapacuri, Meru, or El Santo Angel like we used to know it. Joined us to learn about this natural heritage of humanity. The Canaima National Park is located in the Bolívar state in Venezuela. It covers more than 30,000 square kilometers, in the third largest national park in the country. 65% of the park is occupied by tepees, plateaus and vertical walls on almost flat peaks formed millions of years ago, when America and Africa formed a single continent. The most well-known tepees are the Roraima and the Ayotepui. The park is also known for its impressive waterfall, among which is El Anse. The park is also known for its impressive waterfall, among which is Santo Angel, the largest in the world, the Apuncuao, the Caramata, as well as the Lawful Lower Altitude waterfalls. The park has a great biodiversity thanks to the multiple ecosystems that converge in its territory. Recent studies identify more than 1,000 species among mammals and happier reptile, fish, and birds. Some of the endemic species of the natural reserve are the giant cachicamo, the other, the giant anteater, the dragon maracle, and the meaning thought. Its beautiful landscape and unique biodiversity made it UNESCO World Heritage since 1994.
ponemos punto final al programa de hoy. Recuerde.
That's how we put an end to today's programs. Remember, you can contact us throughout the social network that appear on the screen. Don't forget that we applied the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. You can make the difference in environmental care. I am Madeline Garcia, and it was a pleasure to accompany you. See you next time.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Aquí estoy frente a los muros, libre de hablar realidades, de celebrar mis conjuros, de cantar nuestras verdades. Vengo de todas las madres con hijos nunca encontrados. Soy el sueño de mi padre, el de un continente alzado. Yo vine a mostrar los rostros, a nombrarme en tus palabras, para sabernos nosotros, para que el camino abra. A decir lo necesario, de pie junto a mis hermanos, señalar a los contrarios, alzando en puños las manos. Celebro la justa hora de no bajar la mirada, de buscar allí en la aurora nuestra historia liberada. TeleSUR, 15 años al aire, libres.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomism. Monday, only on TeleSUR. Follow our latest updates concerning the novel coronavirus by checking our special content in our website, where you will be able to get the most reliable details and numbers for each continent, available from your mobile device or desktop. TeleSUR, connecting the global south.
In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on TeleSUR.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get your body. Tuesdays, only on TeleSUR.
The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays, only on TeleSUR.
Aquí estoy frente a los muros, libre de hablar realidades, de celebrar mis conjuros, de cantar nuestras verdades. Vengo de todas las madres con hijos nunca encontrados. Soy el sueño de mi padre, el de un continente alzado. Yo vine a mostrar los rostros, a nombrarme en tus palabras, para sabernos nosotros, para que el camino abra. A decir lo necesario, de pie junto a mis hermanos, señalar a los contrarios, alzando en puños las manos. Celebro la justa hora de no bajar la mirada, de buscar allí en la aurora nuestra historia liberada. TeleSUR, 15 años al aire, libres.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR.
Hello and welcome to We Caribbean, a special program in which we discuss and analyze the issues affecting the region, giving a voice to those who are impacted. It's their issues, their concerns, their triumphs on We Caribbean. I'm your host, Doris Polo. 5 months after presidential elections led to a political stalemate in Guyana, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali was sworn in as the new president. The ceremony was held on August 2nd, hours after Guyana's Elections Commission declared Ali's People's Progressive Party Civic the winner. GCOM made the announcement following the submission of a report by Chief Elections Officer Keith Lowenfield, who used the recount figure as stipulated by the courts. Lowenfield is out on bail and is facing 3 criminal charges relating to fraud, misconduct, and breach of public trust for providing false results. For his part, former President David Granger said he was considering an election petition, given the long list of irregularities. The political crisis saw widespread protests, numerous legal proceedings, and economic sanctions imposed on former President David Granger, his family, and his allies by the United States. Joining us to discuss the way forward for the South American country, which has experienced an enormous oil boom, are Peter Wickham, pollster for the Caribbean Development Research Services, and political analyst Dr. David Hines. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dr. Hines, my first question is to you. I mean, the declaration of these results, it has been a really long time coming. What can we expect to see going forward with this new government?
Well, the new government is going to try, I think, to impose itself as quickly as possible, because I think it would be aware that it will be fighting against time. And I say that because I think it is only a matter of time before we see protests again from the opposition. I think we've had a lull in momentum from the opposition side because they are engaged in their own internal soul searching, as is normally the case when a party loses an election. And I think the government is quite aware of that. So it is trying to put itself in place in anticipation of that. And you see it making moves at the top of the police force, because the police force is going to be very crucial in this next era. You see it going into the ministries and exposing alleged irregularities. So they're moving very quickly because they know that this quote-unquote honeymoon is going to be very short. So I think they're preparing for what I anticipate is really going to be a prolonged confrontation.
It's interesting that you would have mentioned the police being involved, because we've seen a number of people being arrested aligned to the APNU AFC government. So, Mr. Wickham, I have to ask you, do you think that these arrests that we've been seeing in recent weeks is in any way politically motivated, or is it really just generally the police service doing its job?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, because I mean, all of the individuals would have been politically exposed. You have the Lowenfield and Mingo, who are technically speaking not they're public servants. They're not political operatives. But I think we generally agree that they appear to have been operating in a political way. And I think that the fact that the two have been charged, first privately, and now apparently the charges have been taken over by the DPP. To me, it was entirely expected. And I said all along that I felt that there was concern over their prosecution that may have had a lot to do with the fact that this process took as long as it did. I was a bit surprised to hear that Valda Lawrence was being charged, that she was being charged with conspiracy, I believe is the charge that they brought against her. She would be one of the political operatives that has surprised me, the fact that there's a charge against her. And then the other gentleman, who I believe was a minister, where they raided his house and found, barbarian supplies of some sort. Again, I mean, I'm not sure why he would have found it necessary to have those supplies at his house after an election has been called such a long time ago. A number of people to me were asking for trouble, and I think that he would have been in a situation like that. I really would prefer Guyana to get on with the business of rebuilding and not to be going after people in the former administration. But I'm also appreciative of the fact that it's a reality of life that politicians will have to settle a few scores. And I think that the fact that it has only been them and not more is something that we can take some comfort in.
Yeah. Now, under the former CARICOM chair, Mia Motley, the bloc demanded a swift resolution to the political deadlock. The question really arises now, was CARICOM, Dr. Hines, a toothless dog in this matter? What else could have been done?
Well, hindsight is a hell of a thing. Obviously, CARICOM was part of a larger plot of regime change. I think that has become obvious now when we see the moves that the government has made since. We see the moves that the Americans have made vis-a-vis this government, and the moves that the government has made vis-a-vis the Americans is very clear that regime change. I mean, Guyana, the new Guyana government has now fallen in line in terms of taking the side of the opposition in Venezuela as against the side of Maduro, which is a big shift in Guyana's foreign policy. And the American government announced with glee that Guyana is now on their side. And there are other things that are coming out. I think CARICOM got caught in that. And so therefore, there is going to be a period when I think the relations between Guyana and CARICOM would have to be ironed out. But as of now, as you've noticed, the CARICOM leadership they're not saying anything in relation to Guyana. I think they've done what they set out to do, and then that's over and they've moved on.
Yeah, most definitely. And Mr. Wickham, you spoke, well, we heard Dr. Hines mention the foreign policy. How does this government's policy differ as it relates to, Guyana, this new administration, from the Granger government?
Well, I mean, I was a bit surprised to hear Dr. Lewis speak to this whole Guyana-Venezuela situation just now. I had no idea that has been changed, that the policy had been changed. If it has been changed, it is now inconsistent with the rest of CARICOM, because the rest of CARICOM has been very clear in support of Maduro. I didn't realize that Guyana's government went in a different direction. But my more important concern now is less about that and more about the whole idea of the broader foreign policy. I think the Guyana government now has the capacity to articulate a foreign policy that essentially can coordinate, collaborate, can work with partners in the Caribbean, partners internationally, the ABC countries. They can sit down and work with them. The reality is that I wouldn't say that it differs significantly from the other administration, but I think that what is fundamentally different is that you can actually speak to these people. I do not believe the Granger administration would have been in a position to have any kind of bilateral talks with America, the United Kingdom, Canada, anyone in the Caribbean simply because he lacked the legitimacy to do so. I do feel, however, that the current administration has that legitimacy and it enables them to chart a course. So let's say if we don't agree that there's any fundamental substantive difference with the philosophical position, I think that there definitely is a difference in that this government can now engage with all of its partners regionally and internationally in a way that the other government under President Granger could not. Certainly Dr. Hines is saying it's regime change. I think the reality is that these governments were taking a position that was consistent with what they thought was fundamentally right. And I can't have an argument with that.
Yeah, but just to clarify, when they had the inauguration, the entire ceremony, the swearing in on, it would have been August 2nd, Dr. Ali mentioned basically the same position as it relates to Venezuela. However, I feel like this government might be more so aligned with the United States than the Granger government. Now, I want to pick up where you left off, Mr. Wickham, and go to Dr. Hines. The country, with the oil find, Guyana is undoubtedly, you know, expected to have the fastest growing economy in the hemisphere. But it begs the question now, how will it affect the way it relates with other CARICOM countries and how other nations internationally perceive Guyana? Because it was always this small island, this poor country, and now it's quite different.
Well, yes, Guyana is going to play a big role. I mean, as far as geopolitics are concerned, as far as hemispheric politics are concerned. But the question of how it deals, that is, the Guyana government deals with the outer world as far as oil is concerned, is already an issue, because supporters of the new government are now, only after 3 weeks, are beginning to criticize the government, because the PPP had said that it would renegotiate the oil contracts when it was in opposition. And a lot of people supported it on that ground. And now, coming to power, within the first 2 weeks, it said, no, we're not renegotiating the oil contracts. And the oil interests in Guyana, which supported them, are saying, but you fooled us, because you told us that you were going to renegotiate the oil contract. So one of the daily newspapers, for example, the Kaichor News, which was very, very, very supportive of this new government coming to power, but that newspaper has been a harsh critic of the last government for not negotiating with the oil companies in the interest of Guyanese. And they broke with that government, the coalition, to support the PPP, the understanding that was what the PPP was going to do. But now the PPP, as I said, has come to power and decided it's not going to renegotiate those contracts. So the PPP government is caught between its commitment to the United States and the other ABC countries that it will not interfere with the oil operations and the oil contract, and supporters at home who believed that it was going to come in to renegotiate those contracts. So that's where things are at the moment. And I think it's going to blow up even louder as the weeks and months go by.
Yeah, I mean, we know Barjagdeo during the campaign and then after the elections when there was the political stalemate, he mentioned that any oil company that would have struck a deal with the Granger administration was going to be blacklisted, and then we haven't heard anything, as you mentioned. With that, we'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll continue our discussion with Peter Wickham and Dr. David Hines as we do our post-op on Guyana going forward. Stay with us.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. Follow our latest updates concerning the novel coronavirus by checking our special content in our website, where you will be able to get the most reliable details and numbers for each continent, available from your mobile device or desktop. TeleSUR, connecting the Global South.
Welcome back. Mr. Wickham, I'd like to continue our discussion on Guyana's new government with you, CARICOM Chair Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. He condemned the political crisis, and he also challenged the new government in his Emancipation Day message to bring a resolution to the assassination of Walter Rodney. He was killed, of course, you would know it, on June 13th, 1980, and then 40 years later. What can this administration do?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and probably Dr. Hines is in a better position to answer it. I think that the previous administration has made an effort to come to some conclusion in that regard. There was a fairly expensive commission of inquiry into the matter. As far as I know, that came up short, and there's no clear recommendation. And it's useful that Dr. Gonsalves has reminded the administration that this needs to be a priority. As to where they can go with this matter, that's something that I'm really unsure about.
If I may,
Dr. Hines,
yes, if I may. Well, there was a commission of inquiry under this government that's here now, but when they were there the last time. And as soon as the coalition government came in, it brought the inquiry to an abrupt end, much to the consternation of one of its partners, the Working People's Alliance, which is Rodney's party, and really did nothing about, it was tabled in Parliament, but that was it. They've never officially published the report. They did not act on the recommendations coming out of the report. So if this government is serious about Walter Rodney, it can do those things. It can officially publish the report, and secondly, it can implement the recommendations of the report. And one of the recommendations of the report is the depoliticization of the police force, that Guyana should have professional police force. And this government, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as it came to power, continues, and I think at another level, the politicization of the police force. So in that sense, the government is acting against the recommendations of the Rodney report. So I do not think the Walter Rodney issue is high up on the agenda of this government, but who knows?
Yeah, and we also saw there was an incident in 2015, I would like to think, with Mr. Ewing, who was killed, an activist of some sort for the APNU AFC, and there was no resolution brought to that either. Now, how can, and this question goes out to both of you, how can this new government ensure that citizens benefit from this oil boom? Because we've asked this question before.
Yeah, but I mean, if I can go first. I think it's fairly clear that Guyana has to learn from the lesson of Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is a useful opportunity to learn mistakes that may have been made in terms of distribution of oil wealth. My sense is that that's something that they have to have learned, and if they have, they'll be in a better position to ensure that all sectors benefit. I remember President Granger early on said that he felt that health and education, I believe, were the two sectors that he identified, should benefit significantly from oil wealth. I don't think that anyone can argue with that. Certainly, health and education are two things that, generally speaking, people will always agree on. And I think if there's one policy that ought to be continued, it's that. I think the other thing that they need to be very wary of is not to let Guyanese believe that, no, the oil has been found, everyone gets a free ride, no one has to work any longer. That would be a grave error. And I feel that they need to keep activities going. The one thing that I was happy about that the new administration has announced is that they are going to pursue a level of diversity, especially as it relates to non-oil production of energy. So they're looking to go back into hydroelectric. I thought that the end of the Amira Falls project was unfortunate. I believe that is the kind of project that will help to bring the level of diversity, especially now the oil prices are at a historic low in terms of Guyana's future. So I think that a balance in terms of oil and in terms of other zero carbon emission type energy generation as would come from the falls would be the kind of thing that I hope that they would go into. And then, as I said, learn from the mistakes of Trinidad and Tobago and try to ensure that there is a reasonable distribution of the oil wealth and that it touches vulnerable sectors like health and education.
Yeah. Dr. Hines, there's undoubtedly a racial divide in Guyana. Can this new government temper those issues?
No, and I'm very glad because that's where I was going. So you, as they say, you read my mind. Look, the issue over the elections was the issue of the distribution of oil wealth, and that remains a significant issue. As soon as it came back to power, the government has announced that it will reopen the sugar industries, the sugar estates that were closed. The previous government had downsized the sugar industry by closing some estates. The new government has said that it will reopen those estates. Now, the downsizing came about because Guyana was producing sugar far way above what it costs for other countries to produce. And so the government was heavily subsidizing the industry. Now, with the reopening of the estates, and the sugar industry is 90%, perhaps more than that, people by Indian Guyanese. And so therefore, it would mean that the subsidizing of the sugar industry will continue, and that it is clear where a lot of the oil revenues will go. And so that is a way of ethnically funneling oil revenues to one group in the society. And that is already causing a lot of disquiet in the country. The other thing is that Guyana ideologically remains a kind of left-of-center country, slightly different from the other Caribbean countries, because the major parties in Guyana, for all intents and purposes, old socialist parties. The PPP was in a communist party. And so the question of what happens to the working class becomes a very important issue. One of the parties in the coalition, the WPF, put forward a proposal for cash transfers to households as a means of adding to their income coming from the oil wealth. And it generated a lot of discussion in the country. The coalition eventually reluctantly embraced it, but they never campaigned on it. And some analysts believe that it's one of the reasons it came up short in terms of votes. And the PPP has now put that on the table, and it has committed itself to some form of cash transfer. So there are going to be debates around how the revenues are distributed from the standpoint of social class and from the standpoint of ethnicity and race.
Most definitely. We have a lot to look forward to in Guyana. Mr. Wickham, before we go, as we've run out of time, I must ask you, Jamaica has elections set for September 3rd. We also see that a snap election was called in Bermuda. That would be October 1st, almost 2 years before it's actually constitutionally due. We're seeing a trend in the Caribbean. What are your thoughts on this, and what can you explain to our viewers as far as what we can look forward to?
I mean, it's the COVID effect, and certainly I've been commenting on it for a while now, that COVID has created a very unstable future for most Caribbean countries, and indeed most countries anywhere in the world. As a result, any person who has the option to call an election early will do so, because you can mitigate the short-term effects of COVID far more easily than the long-term effects. Bermuda is a country that is heavily dependent on tourism and heavily dependent on offshore investment. I mean, all of that has virtually collapsed in much the same way that it has across the rest of the region. And our Westminster system, as it stands now, allows a prime minister to call an election whenever he or she feels like. And any election, any Caribbean country where elections are due, they will call it up early. So Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Lucia, I wouldn't be surprised if they called their election earlier than planned. And then, yeah, of course, the Bermuda has now gone to the polls as well. And it makes good political sense because it means that you only have to speak to your population about the short-term effects of COVID. When 6 months from now, planes are still not flying and tourism-dependent economies are still suffering, you don't have to explain that to your population because it will be harder then to explain to them why they're still not working. So it's good politics. And because we have the option to call elections early, ultimately we are.
It's always a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Wickham and Dr. Hines. With that, we've come to the end of this week's episode of We Caribbean. I am Doris Polo. To keep up with news and more, go to our website, telesurenglish.net, or join us on social media. See you next week.
إنه يوم حزين. بيروت منكوبة. لبنان مصاب بكارثة. نعم، إنها كارثة وطنية كبرى. المشاهد التي نراها تعبر عن المأساة وتحكي عن حجم المصيبة التي ضربت لبنان. بيروت ثكلى. لبنان كله اليوم منكوب.
Sonriendo entre los feroces arquitectos de zarpazos,
señal que no pierde el paso, amplificando otras voces.
Las voces desobedientes, mestizas de ese salobre, indio, campesino y pobre, más humano que clientes.
Semiótica que entra al juego desde la piel del sufrido. Júbilo que bajo fuego, más se yergue convencido, ni sudaca con espuelas,
ni parlante mal nacido.
Negativas verdaderas ante el falso positivo.
La espada de Bolívar atravesó al sol. Se levanta nuestra voz. Soy como tú eres como yo. Se levanta nuestra voz. Norte, hacia sur, nuestro sur, tu corazón. Se levanta nuestra voz. Entérate, despiértate. Nuestra voz. Las plazas con las abuelas cerran llanto de cenizas, cielos que van deprisa, glaciares de viejas penas.
Continente de maíz, de quinoa, soya y arroz, curándose el hambre atroz que anclaron en su raíz.
Caravana de migrantes corrigiendo con los pies los geométricos sangrantes cálculos de Hernán Cortés. Periodismo compañero del estudiante sangrando, ojos que siguen mirando de frente al carabinero. Passada por nós quando ainda criança, ciranda dos povos, na ginga dos corpos, palafitas, mocambos, quilombos, favelas. O povo resiste na tardia, na falsa abolição. Todas as penetas dos oprimidos pela colonização. O povo de luta nas trincheiras da nova guerra social. De acabouca, vive na mata, busca alimento pra alma. Fazendo a caça, acertando a flecha na cega.
sépase que la verdad hay que saber defenderla o nos vuelven a estafar con cristales y linternas.
Manipulación mediática, maltratando las conciencias, por si el lucro no descansa, pues que nuestro amor no duerma.
En otro punto de vista, las venas abiertas del continente,
compromiso con la vida, somos señal insurgente,
donde lo vilipendiado se descubre por valiente.
compromiso con la vida, somos señal insurgente,
la espada de Bolívar otra vez se alzó.
Compromiso con la vida, somos señal insurgente.
El dolor de un continente, intenso, largo, profundo, Dios lo anida en nuestro vientre para que renazca el mundo.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR. Follow our programming minute by minute. Our signal in audio format is now also available on our website. Get the latest updated facts and news emerging around the world from a Latin American reliable angle. TeleSUR, connecting the global south. Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on TeleSUR.
This demonstration has been presented in the United States in the murder of George Floyd by a policeman in the city of Minneapolis. The fact has once again revealed the systemic and structural racism in this country, which has its origin in the processes of the slavery and forced migration of Africans in the colonial period, whose practices remain in force. The murder of George Floyd and the hand of the police officer in the United States has gone around the world and gone viral. It has moved public opinion. But there are no new but that system violence and racism has long existed and evolved toward people of African descent and Latin America. This fact also gone viral because the person who broadcast lived like the police officer was holding, assaulting, and murdering George Floyd. The Afro-descendant people in the United States is a minority social group that is day that arise after a forced migration later in the 18th and 19th century. From here, more than 12 million people of African descent and black were brought or enslaved to North America and also in this way most the United States. Some people who today are supposed to contain all rights of citizens, but who continues to live and survive this racist segregation. Will be this imagination that has already become an icon worldwide. Once again, a white man inserts ruthless violence against the humanity of a black man. That May 26, the live broadcast of the event allowed the narrative of the dominant elite to not be imposed this time.
The Floyd murder brought with it that people could really see the brutality at the top level of the cops. 8 minutes with 40 seconds, a defenseless man shouting, "Please, I can breathe." That's awful. So people took the streets first as a claim of local demonstration that then spread across the United States and even in other countries. What are they looking for? A structural change in all systems.
Que se busca un cambio estructural en todos los sistemas.
Was the last straw. Tutors demonstrated to the street in protest and demanding justice. In some places, violence against the Afro-descendant community turned in uncontrolled anger. Institutions and shops were attacked in this infrastructure. The Minneapolis Police headquarters, where the official who participated in the Floyd murder worker has warned of the officer abandoning. The mayor declared a state of emergency and U.S. National Guard soldiers were deployed to the streets of the city.
I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents.
La ira da paso rápidamente a multitudinarias manifestaciones en más de 100 ciudades a lo largo del país.
Quickly give way to mass demonstration in more than 100 cities across the country that are streets for several weeks. An anti-racist citizen mobilization set a precedent in U.S. history. Seen demonstrating over the assassination of the civil rights leader Martin Luther King, which occurred in 1968.
Washington, Nueva York y Boston. Miles de personas son arrestadas en medio de las protestas.
Tonight, I'm ordering another curfew in Washington, D.C. We want your voices to be heard, but we also want to protect the safety of everyone in our city. Tonight's curfew will begin at 7 p.m. and will run for 2 days.
Nothing, but anytime black people decide to stand up for themselves, we're always made to be violent. And this curfew, I think, is a microaggression to that and for change, because you're proving and consistently telling us that we need to be tamed and controlled because we are their property.
Donald Trump awaited calming the situation and modified word to it. To his own Twitter horse constant threat to the protesters. Later, reading from the microphone of the White House, he announced the use of military force to suppress the protests.
As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property.
Incorporate the army into the containment of protest generates strong criticism in the country. The so-called doctrine of national security, well known in Latin America, it is to declare a part of the population as an integral enemy and to introduce the armed force to fight them.
Today I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
This national security doctrine, now mobilized against an internal enemy, that is a way of confirming once again that the citizens' rights of individuals who have been racially inferiorized are formal rights that have no concreteness in the political social reality of the United States.
This crackdown on African descent and Latino communities in the United States has been repeated for decades. Institutionally, justice system covered up these funds, and the vast majority of them got unpunished. This is the clear differentiation between the treatment of the Black and Latino American people by the police compared to the whites. There are not even official statistics on the case that has been brought to trial of the lawsuit field.
It's gotten to a point where black people are just asking not to be killed, and the police and the government just saying, but like, it's just gotten ridiculous. We see black bodies being killed and marginalized and tortured every single day, and this system it just gotta stop. Like this, there's no reason that we're in modern day times and still have the mentalities rooted in slavery.
That violence against racialized population in the US against those subjects considered as non-human or almost human by the colonial history of the United States has everything related with the colonialism in the United States.
Conflict is rooted in various everyday practices and roots start from the very founding of the American Union. For its birth, this country became one of the most important voyagers abducted slaves in Africa. The vast majority were stationed from plantations in the southern states to the war in agriculture. This war in 1861 has triggered the abolition of the slavery decree by the northern states and had in response to an attempt to the secession of the southern state, which was eventually stifled.
In this moment, everyone is sort of expressing their anger with the fact that it's been over almost 200 years since the end of slavery. And we're still dealing with racism, we're still dealing with police brutality, we're still dealing with unequal treatment.
Let's remember that the US was formed as a state with a strong colonial history. We have a state of 13 colonies in the eastern United States that became independent from Britain, but which maintained the same colonial hierarchies of colonial history the day of the independence. That is, that there was no decolonization, it was independence without decolonization.
The practices of exploitation and subjugation to the African descent community by the ruling white elite has not ceased.
We have to understand that here in the United States, 32% of the American population is Latino African American, and 56% of the American prisoners are African American and Latinos. There is an unacceptable disproportion, and people is already tired.
While we're dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, we as people of color have to deal with that other pervasive pandemic that was here long before the coronavirus, and that is the pandemic of racism and discrimination that leads to unjustified killings of Black people and nobody being held accountable.
The Descent of the United States, as well as the other communities such as Latin American people, has presently struggled for decades to reverse the situation, claimed to be treated as equal and overcome the colonialist part that is still present in the United States. The 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution was approved after the Civil War in the 19th century, and thus recognizes the right of all citizens, which also includes the slave and descendant of a slave. Until now, that has not right from their all people were entitled to the Constitution right that it has been collected during all this time, but that 150 years later, with the murder of George Floyd, revealed that in the United States there is a citizenship where rights and other citizenships without rights. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, has been named from the point of view of many analysts as the leader of white supremacists. In this way, also with his policies, he has been criticized from radicalizing this gap between white people and Black people. The murder of George Floyd in the hands of the police not only generates protests and outright demonstrations around the world, but also call into question the issue of right and citizenship. Millions of Americans of African Latino origin, even though they reside on whole nationality, are not treated as citizens in the United States. Amendment number 14 of the Constitution established citizenship by the birth on the U.S. territory. However, in practice, many rights are denied to this part of the population.
So, of course, it is a problem. We are American citizens in quotation marks because we do not enjoy that freedom that the amendment says. We do not enjoy it. There are many statutes within the amendment of the Constitution which are not complied with. Having an American citizenship does not make you different in the sense of the treatment of the state, the treatment of institutions, and the treatment of labor markets. Does not make you an equal, but you can have American citizenship formally and the rights that are supposed to apply to you that collapse when you are gradually classified as a part of these subjects who are considered as internal enemies in quotation marks by the American capitalist racial state.
In years, the Donald Trump administration has been carried out reforms with the explicit goal of increasingly registering the entrance of migrants. It has also threatened to the end amendment number 14, a fact that would call into question the citizenship of millions of American Afro descent and Latin Americans, who already see their right under their own terms on a daily basis.
Este presidente está sí cambiando dentro del sistema.
The president is trying to change the immigration system under executive orders. We already live it with groups of children separated from their families. We feel like foreigners in a country where we were born. For example, my children, they are mixed, born and raised here, and they are afraid to go out on the streets. They are feared to going out.
Mis hijos son mestizos, nacidos y criados aquí, y ellos temen salir a la calle. Temen salir.
Systematic and institutional racism in the United States is expressed in the daily life of reality in fair-side population, violence and police brutality that part of reality faced by millions of people every day.
Es una angustia estar en las calles.
It's an anguish to be on the street. It is an anguish to handle with that pressure, with that tension. If you see cops, it is a protocol and a routine that you have to integrate into your daily life if you don't want to have troubles because racism is everywhere.
Para no tener problemas en la calle. Porque el racismo está en todos los lugares.
In the United States, 1,000 people die annually and more than 80,000 are injured on the hands of the law enforcement. A study by the U.S. Public Health Association found in the system cause of death for males between the age 25 and 29 is a violent confrontation with the police. Afro-descendant and Latin American are the most likely to be victims of this kind of violence, suffering up to 4 times more attacks than whites in case of violence and police brutality.
Black people have been killed in the United States for 300 years, not once a month, not once a week, but daily. It means methods of violence and disposing are constant methods in the way that racial capitalism operates in the United States against Afro-descendant people, but also against the Latin population and indigenous people.
Donald Trump assumed the President of the United States, numerous organizations and social movements in the country and the world announced that his government not only represents the interests of supremacist groups, but he himself has exercised a leadership position for this sector of the population.
President Trump is a racist, totally racist president who is also leader of America's white supremacist movement. He is the one who is convening them, giving instructions from the White House. Instead of blockading, seeking negotiation, seeking that dialogue with civil rights defenders, with us who are human rights defenders, with people like us, only incites the racist. That group that has increased in every way to be aggressive and to be xenophobic.
ese grupo que ha aumentado en todos los sentidos a ser agresivo, ser xenofóbico.
Donald Trump has encouraged supremacist groups to manifest themselves and openly defend racist ideas and anti-immigrant speeches, yet institutional racism in the United States goes far beyond his rule. It is a structural reality that is also manifested on both sides of the dispute over political power in the country.
Difference is that while Trump openly announces these racial policies, the liberal multiculturalism, which has been the management system used by George Bush, the Republican, and used by Obama, well, they don't openly announce these things.
Esto no tiene que ver específicamente con ser negro o ser blanco ni nada.
This has nothing to do with being black or being white or anything. President Obama, for example, because he was the first black president, is when the increase of separation of family begins. The immigration rates were extreme. Just because they were Latin American, it was automatically a problem. Adding to that, being black makes things more complicated.
A eso le suma que ser negro complica más las cosas.
With Obama, this happened, but under the table, because Obama has a black face. The White House is used by a black man who gave a multiculturalist speech that makes these crimes be invisible.
And process sparked by the murder Floyd in the hands of police quickly spread across the world and then around the world. Millions of people took the street to express solidarity with the people of African descent in the United States, but it also went out to spread against racism and violence in their own home countries.
I feel thrilled for living and witness this historic moment that is happening here in the United States and also worldwide, to see that people no longer want to have master, to see that people at national and international level, as in the Congo, as in Germany, that are places where there is a story of racism.
Demolition and protest against tariffs associated with the colonization processes were phenomena that emerged in demonstrations around the world, mainly in countries in Europe and the United States, a fund that reflects awareness about the relationship between the validity of racism and the colonial history of Western power.
Now we see movements vandalizing the statues of the old slavers, the old colonizers, in England, in Belgium, in France, in Spain, and in the United States, of course. They go after the statue of Columbus, but not only of Columbus, but also the owners of the slave plantations, of those characters of colonial history who were genocidal.
And police brutality in the United States is expression of a structural reality that affects the lives of millions of African descent and Latin Americans, who, while citizens on paper, in practice their most fundamental rights are violated, and the present social actors bring back to the public scene and racism and supremacist speech call into the question the citizenship of this sector of population, a sector that has now been lifted to demand structural change in the plain racist society. In practice, people of African descent and Latin America, many of them in the United States, are not considered native, and this means that they are also not trained with the full right of citizenship and erode, and also links to domination by the working class. By many states that carry out with colonialism, especially in Latin America and also in Asian countries, Throughout this colonialism, they exploited the natural resources of many countries and also human resources, leaving many human rights violations that are still claimed today. The demand is called for justice in this white colonialism to the state still exists, and the front of this colonialism is based on and replicated through racism. With the history we leave you on the today's program. As well, always see you again in other here, Between Borders.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
Quetzals in the sky. So here they are, my child, the wings of the Quetzal calling the sun, and bringing light to the world so peoples can be reborn. Grandma's memory talking to us all the time about a world that was dying in order to bloom again. And it caught us by surprise, like a kiss in the morning star. So is death and life, and so fragile in the progress. It acknowledges your pain, shouting everywhere, so is the pain of a birth, so is to change from the inside. Let's look at the sun straight ahead, with the eyes in our chest, in order for our soul to grow, and the fruit may be good. See, my child, that the night was not only salt and fear, that in order to become stronger, we had to go through this. And even though you may not acknowledge it and think that we don't see it, the light of a beautiful sun is not hidden. If it would only be your case, if only you would be wind, if only you would be humble, so everything is done. Tomorrow you will be a grandmother, invoke at the bright star. You will be the phrase that flies and crosses over all fear. The hope in this world are Quetzals in the sky. TeleSUR English presents a weekly program to discuss the political, economic and social issues affecting the Caribbean community. We'll challenge stereotypes and unpack the diversity of the region through the analysis of unique cultures, religions and art. We Caribbean. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Una travesía para descubrirnos. Buscamos conexiones perdidas.
No nos queda otra que luchar, porque no tenemos nada que perder.
Realmente es por todos.
Recorremos el mundo con Reportajes TeleSUR.
إنه يوم حزين. بيروت منكوبة. لبنان مصاب بكارثة. نعم، إنها كارثة وطنية كبرى. المشاهد التي نراها تعبر عن المأساة وتحكي عن حجم المصيبة التي ضربت لبنان. بيروت ثكلى. لبنان كله اليوم منكوب.
In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on TeleSUR.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean. The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on TeleSUR. TeleSUR English presents a weekly program to discuss the political, economic and social issues affecting the Caribbean community. We'll challenge stereotypes and unpack the diversity of the region through the analysis of unique cultures, religions and art. We Caribbean. Wednesdays. Only on TeleSUR.
El interior de un teléfono móvil de última generación puede llegar a esconder un terrible crimen en el que se involucran la explotación ilegal de mano de obra, explotación ilegal de recursos naturales, hasta la esclavitud en pleno siglo XXI. Con el acelerado avance de las tecnologías móviles, el foco sobre minerales como el estaño, el cobalto, el coltán o tantalio los convierten en la materia prima más preciada para las grandes transnacionales, por su utilidad en el ámbito de la electrónica. ¿Qué sabemos de la industria de la tecnología móvil? ¿Sabías que algunas piezas de un celular son hechas con minerales extraídos por la explotación de niños? Cruda y dura realidad. Y es que esos niños y niñas que laboran horas y horas diarias y que muchas veces son el sustento de sus familias, viven en países del continente africano, el mismo continente que hoy posee 1/3 de las reservas minerales del planeta. Esos minerales, sobre todo en la mitad sur del continente, son un componente fundamental de la economía regional y en algunos países se aprecia una fuerte dependencia. Lo más triste es que los recaudos de esos minerales no necesariamente benefician a esos pueblos. Un ejemplo claro es lo que pasa en la República Democrática del Congo, potencialmente uno de los países más ricos de la tierra, pero el colonialismo, la esclavitud, la corrupción lo condenaron a ser uno de los más pobres. En este país, la explotación infantil es una triste realidad. ¿Qué papel juegan los organismos internacionales en la defensa de los derechos de los niños y niñas en ese país? ¿Qué control ejercen las grandes transnacionales sobre la tercerización laboral? ¿Cuál es el papel del Estado ante esta situación? Pero más allá, ¿el mundo miraría al Congo cuando todos se benefician de esa mano de obra barata? ¿Cómo se explica que en pleno siglo XXI una gran parte de la tecnología dependa de un niño dando martillazos a una piedra y un pedazo de tierra se le venga encima y a veces hasta pierden la vida? Explotación infantil en el Congo, minerales de sangre. Pongamos el punto en la I.
La República Democrática del Congo es uno de los países más ricos de la Tierra, debido a que el 80% de las reservas minerales mundiales se encuentran en su territorio. Entre los más codiciados aparecen el cobalto, cobre, uranio, oro, diamantes, casiterita y coltán. En este país, el colonialismo, la esclavitud y la corrupción han condenado a su pueblo a ser uno de los más pobres de la región africana. La explotación minera es una de las actividades fundamentales en la República Democrática del Congo. Las principales zonas mineras se encuentran en el este del país: Katanga, Kivu Norte y Sur e Ituri. Desde allí se lleva a cabo la minería artesanal, donde se contratan ilegalmente a los obreros, y entre ellos a menores de edad, por largas horas de trabajo y un bajísimo salario.
No estudio. Mi trabajo es buscar minerales.
Aquí los grupos armados controlan las minas y las rutas de tránsito, compran armas y cometen actos de violencia. Desafortunadamente, bajo el marco legal congoleño actual, toda la explotación minera artesanal en el Congo Oriental es técnicamente ilegal, ya que ninguna de las zonas de explotación minera ha sido designada oficialmente como zonas para la explotación minera artesanal.
Hay que entender que la realidad del Congo es muy compleja, es muy contrastada, por ejemplo, con lo que uno puede conocer en Uruguay geográficamente. Hay mucha selva, hay muchos caminos, muchas zonas de muy difícil acceso, aún con buena voluntad. A modo de ejemplo, para hacer en 2014, para hacer 149 kilómetros, yo puse casi 15 horas. Esto tiene que ver con falta de infraestructura, y siento que yo iba con toda la tranquilidad del mundo. Quien tiene que llegar rápido a un lugar para proteger una aldea, proteger una villa o rescatar un grupo de niños que puede estar siendo explotados o secuestrados para ser transformados en soldados de alguna guerrilla, tiene el mismo tipo de complicaciones. Entonces, en terreno, trabajar y lograr una protección total, integral de los niños es algo de muy difícil solución.
En el este de la República Democrática del Congo se concentra la mayor cantidad de minas de coltán, cobalto, oro, de las cuales se nutren las grandes transnacionales mundiales. Desde Katanga hasta Kivu e Ituri, la práctica de la minería ilegal es un hecho afianzado. A lo largo de los años, varias organizaciones internacionales han denunciado la explotación infantil en minas de estas regiones. De acuerdo con la UNICEF, en el 2014 más de 40.000 niños trabajaron en las minas de cobalto en el Congo Sur. Y aunque los niños dijeron que trabajaban porque sus padres no cuentan con un trabajo formal para cubrir los gastos de su educación, las condiciones laborales acarreaban peligros mortales. Es decir, ni siquiera eran condiciones mínimas para un trabajador formal.
El continente africano ocupa el segundo lugar a nivel mundial en cuanto al trabajo infantil. Concretamente, la zona subsahariana con 50 millones de niños trabajadores, de acuerdo a registros de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo. En la República Democrática del Congo, los niños son aprovechados para este tipo de trabajos por su estatura y complexión física. En las minas, los pasillos son bajos y estrechos, por lo que los menores tienen un tamaño ideal para ejecutar el trabajo. Las condiciones son las peores. Laboran durante largas jornadas, expuestos a la muerte por derrumbes. Los que sobreviven cuando se produce un hundimiento pueden quedar discapacitados de por vida. Son sometidos a temperaturas extremas, a ruido, vibraciones, alto grado de humedad, a vapores y polvos nocivos que les causan problemas respiratorios.
El trabajo es agotador, pero a pesar del cansancio no podemos hacer pausas.
De acuerdo con UNICEF, Se considera explotación cuando los contratados tienen una edad demasiado temprana, si el salario es inadecuado o si se impide el acceso a la escolarización. La Declaración de los Derechos del Niño establece como principios básicos que el niño debe crecer en espacios aptos, que posibiliten el desarrollo de sus actitudes. Además, establece que el niño debe ser protegido contra toda forma de abandono, crueldad y explotación.
Es una situación deplorable que necesita ser analizada y que se encuentren soluciones, porque los niños no deberían trabajar en las minas. Su lugar es más bien el colegio. Por desgracia, no hay colegios en esta zona y los que hay se encuentran en un avanzado estado de deterioro. La solución es construir escuelas y mejorar los salarios de los profesores para que los niños dejen las canteras y vayan al colegio.
Para trabajar en las zonas mineras de las que se extrae, por ejemplo, el coltán, el tantalio, la colombita, se hace falta niños porque son cuerpos más pequeños que entran a agujeros más pequeños dentro de la tierra. Son también los que después, a la hora de golpear con un mazo, con un martillo, la piedra, tienen manos pequeñas, entonces pueden ir generando trozos cada vez más pequeños también.
La Organización Internacional del Trabajo define al trabajo infantil, el trabajo forzoso y la trata de personas en las cadenas mundiales de suministro como una violación de los derechos humanos. En contraste, quienes esconden y se aprovechan de estas violaciones alegan en el caso de los niños que trabajan bajo tutela de parientes o sus padres. Y como es el régimen de explotación, bueno, los niños encargados de juntar, clasificar, lavar y transportar minerales les pagan por el tamaño de los sacos. Dado que no existe un criterio fijo de peso de los sacos, los niños están sujetos a la decisión del comerciante y por lo tanto están expuestos a recibir un pago extremadamente bajo. Al final del día, solo permanecen con una pequeña parte de su sueldo, pues deben pagar 50 centavos a los guardias y en ocasiones se los quitan trabajadores adultos. De acuerdo con la Organización Internacional de Trabajo, las lagunas en la legislación, el cumplimiento de la ley y el acceso a la justicia favorecen el incumplimiento de las normas internacionales del trabajo en las cadenas mundiales de suministro. ¿Qué sucede entonces con los supuestos controles establecidos en materia de derechos humanos? ¿Cuál ha sido la postura y la gestión del gobierno del Congo a lo largo de los años para combatir este flagelo?
Es una tercerización laboral muy irregular, porque las transnacionales lo que hacen es comprar el mineral, en este caso estamos hablando en la zona en la que yo he trabajado del Congo, que es en la zona este, estamos hablando mayoritariamente de coltán, que es el mineral que permite que los teléfonos, nuestras tablets, nuestras consolas de videojuegos transmitan la información a mayor velocidad y entonces nosotros tengamos una experiencia más disfrutable, es lo que entendemos a la hora de utilizarlo. Sin embargo, la cadena que hay para atrás tiene elementos tétricos, desde la captación de estos niños para que extraigan el mineral hasta toda una cadena internacional que lo que hace es blanquear los minerales. Por ejemplo, la zona este del Congo se produce en coltán. El Congo tiene, según la mayoría de las bibliotecas, el 80% de la reserva mundial de coltán. Hay algunas otras bibliotecas, que son muy minoría, que dicen que no llega al 20%. Es una cosa muy curiosa porque son las mismas bibliotecas que avalan que Ruanda, que es limítrofe con el Congo, sea el mayor exportador mundial de coltán, siendo que no tiene yacimientos. Es decir, que allí hay un proceso de atravesar las fronteras de manera ilegal con el mineral y poder exportarlo.
Según el Servicio de Asistencia y Marco de la Minería a Pequeña Escala, alrededor de 20% del cobalto congoleño proviene de la minería ilegal. El año pasado, la organización internacional Right Advocates presentaba en nombre de 14 familias congoleñas denuncias contra las grandes compañías Apple, Google, Microsoft, Tesla y Dell. Se les acusó de tener conocimiento de que minerales como el cobalto eran utilizados en sus productos, por lo que podrían estar relacionados con la explotación infantil. Según la asociación, los fallecimientos se produjeron en los túneles de extracción o por el derrumbe de las paredes de las minas. ¿Qué papel juegan las grandes compañías y sus instrumentos legales contra la explotación ilegal? ¿Se consideran estas acciones como parte del enriquecimiento ilícito?
empresas de telefonía celular, las empresas que se dedican a hacer consolas de videojuegos y que tercerizan de la siguiente manera. Hacen contacto, por ejemplo, con un gobierno como el ruandés en épocas de Paul Kagame. Lo que hacen es invertir en su territorio, generar proyectos de ayuda y demás, que lo que hacen en definitiva es ingresar dinero a ese país y a cambio el país lo que hace es recibir el mineral. ¿Cómo hace Ruanda para recibir el mineral? Contrata a un grupo guerrillero que esté del lado congolés, le da formación militar, le da armas y lo mandan a operar. Esta gente esclaviza, extrae mineral, atraviesa la frontera y ese mineral hace un recorrido, generalmente tiene 5 destinos principales, te diría, que son Alemania, Bélgica, Estados Unidos, Kazajistán, que es otro de los destinos principales que tiene, y China.
Nasikia huzuni sana, hataela mazuri babaya, iko naona ni kazi ngumu sana. Si wote tunasemaka iko kilo, tunachoka. Tunawaza tuache kazi ya michanga, tuache kusoma.
¿Cuál es el control que deberían hacer las transnacionales? El de certificar que el mineral que utilizan es obtenido de manera legal. Pero son las mismas transnacionales las que generan el protocolo que indica si un mineral es extraído de manera legal o ilegal. Esto es, si yo pongo las leyes, yo sé cómo eludirlas también. Y entonces se siguen beneficiando de ese mineral. Hay una protección que hacen que es la expresión es por la galería, como para mantener las imágenes, las apariencias, pero en definitiva se siguen beneficiando del negocio.
Kivu del Norte, Kivu del Sur e Ituri se encuentran ubicados en la región este del Congo Democrático, donde se ubica la mayor concentración de minas del país. Esta zona ha sufrido a lo largo de 25 años los constantes ataques violentos de más de 130 grupos armados que se encuentran activos en este territorio y donde se lucran de la extracción ilegal de coltán para comprar armas con las que se cometen masacres masivas sobre poblaciones civiles, violan indiscriminadamente a mujeres y niñas y secuestran a niños para convertirlos en máquinas de matar. ¿Son ellos quienes controlan las principales concentraciones de minas del país? ¿Cuál es la relación entre estos grupos armados y la extracción de la minería ilegal?
El agua interminable del segundo río más largo del mundo, el Congo, un clima favorable y un suelo rico y fértil debajo del que hay abundantes depósitos de cobre, oro, diamantes, cobalto, uranio, coltán y petróleo, para mencionar solo algunos de los minerales que deberían hacerlo uno de los países más ricos del mundo. Varios grupos armados controlan partes del este del Congo Democrático. Allí se encuentra la mayor concentración de minas del país. La guerra de 1998 a 2003, una de las más grandes ocurridas, causó millones de muertos, la mayoría víctimas del hambre y las enfermedades. Hoy todos estos inmensos recursos hacen del Congo Democrático un territorio atractivo para la extracción, la cual está controlada en su mayoría por los grupos armados que operan en la región. Organizaciones internacionales hablan de aproximadamente 130. Mientras, el control de la impresionante riqueza natural de la República Democrática del Congo añade una terrible urgencia a la lucha. En este contexto, niños soldados han sido reclutados a la fuerza para la extracción de minerales como coltán, hoy uno de los componentes claves de la industria de la telefonía móvil. La explotación y el contrabando de los minerales que se encuentran en este país africano se debe en gran medida a la enorme demanda internacional de productos electrónicos, productos que para funcionar necesitan la presencia de componentes construidos a partir de esos materiales.
Los grupos armados lo que hacen es dominar una zona en la que saben que hay un yacimiento del mineral. Vamos a suponer, el grupo que nosotros hemos investigado, que era una rama de los los Mai son algo así como 31 grupos o 33 grupos activos en este momento. Eso va variando mucho porque hay alianzas que son volátiles. Nosotros investigamos a uno que era liderado por el Tabon Taberi, Sheka. Lo que él hacía era dominar una zona, pero bajo un régimen de terror. Su presentación en sociedad, por llamarlo de alguna manera, fue atacando un eje entre Kibúa y Empofi, dos aldeas, pero en el medio, en 4 jornadas de terror, abusaron masivamente de casi 900 mujeres, arrasaron completamente 45 villas, secuestraron a más de 100 niños para que fueran transformados en soldados y además que agarraron a hombres adultos para que cargaran las cosas que ellos mismos les habían robado.
Durante décadas, estos sitios mineros han sido clasificados como minas rojas o verdes, para significar que la explotación estaba oficialmente prohibida, pero con grupos armados, y no permisos, pero comisiones especiales. El mineral siguió extrayéndose aún en peores condiciones y sacándose vía Ruanda, Tanzania, hacia las grandes fábricas de procesamiento en diferentes lugares del planeta. En 5 años, solo 140 minas de las 5.000 que hay en todo el país han sido declaradas como legales, es decir, el 2,8%.
¿Cómo entran las complicidades de los estados en este momento? Bueno, el Estado congolés, por omisión o por complicidad, no llega a esas zonas a actuar. Ha habido grupos extremadamente corrompidos en las Fuerzas Armadas del Congo, en las FARDC, que han tenido connivencia y han hecho negocios en conjunto con estos grupos armados, así como sectores minoritarios de MONUSCO también han participado y han extraído. MONUSCO es la operación de Naciones Unidas en la República Democrática del Congo, también han tomado parte en este negocio de extracción de minerales. Todos se suman al negocio, de la misma manera que hace unos minutos les comentaba del gobierno ruandés o el Estado ruandés, el mayor exportador mundial de coltán sin yacimientos propios. Eso es una paradoja que pinta muy claramente cómo funciona esto. Y hasta donde yo tengo entendido, un poco en menor medida también sucede lo mismo con Uganda. Son 2 países que son limítrofes con la República Democrática del Congo. La zona este es una frontera muy permeable porque es selvática, porque es muy fácil disimular una pista de aterrizaje para que despeguen y aterricen aviones pequeños que va llevando la carga varios viajes. Una lógica similar, podríamos decir, a la del narcotráfico, porque en definitiva las herramientas son las mismas. Es un tráfico ilegal y hay estados efectivamente que terminan siendo cómplices.
Años de violencia y conflicto político en toda la República Democrática del Congo han convertido sus riquezas en su desgracia y en un atractivo recaudador de ingresos, y los grupos armados hacen y harán lo que sea necesario para controlar el suministro. Como resultado, la industria minera en ese país es un rubro en conflicto, estrechamente relacionado con una serie de abusos contra los derechos humanos, de una manera similar a los llamados diamantes de sangre de África, que también se venden para financiar conflictos. Sobre todo en el este del Congo, donde existe una nueva guerra, una compleja red de rivalidades internas e internacionales con grupos rebeldes, enfrentados al ejército, a las organizaciones internacionales, y todo esto mientras pequeñas milicias comunitarias contribuyen a la inestabilidad general. A la par, los millones de dólares que el coltán, cobalto, oro y otros tantos minerales generan no han dejado en esa tierra de riquezas más que miseria y muerte a la población. Los niños son quienes más sufren. El gran drama de la minería en el Congo Democrático es que no genera beneficio para el desarrollo comunitario. La misma lógica de acaparamiento mundial se reproduce en el reparto del dinero que se ingresa localmente y que nunca quedan ni migajas para la construcción de infraestructuras básicas, sino que todo desaparece y es como si no hubiera existido ningún beneficio local. Y mientras el Congo empobrece, grandes empresas de tecnología enriquecen bajo la sombra de la explotación infantil. Pusimos el punto en la I.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on TeleSUR. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on TeleSUR.
Aquí estoy frente a los muros, libre de hablar realidades, de celebrar mis conjuros, de cantar nuestras verdades. Vengo de todas las madres con hijos nunca encontrados. Soy el sueño de mi padre, el de un continente alzado. Yo vine a mostrar los rostros, a nombrarme en tus palabras, para sabernos nosotros, para que el camino abra. A decir lo necesario, de pie junto a mis hermanos, señalar a los contrarios, alzando en puños las manos. Celebro la justa hora de no bajar la mirada, de buscar allí en la aurora nuestra historia liberada. TeleSUR, 15 años al aire, libres.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get Your Body. Tuesdays, only on TeleSUR. A review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en la I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on TeleSUR.
TeleSUR English presents a weekly program to discuss the political, economic, and social issues affecting the Caribbean community. We'll challenge stereotypes and unpack the diversity of the region through the analysis of unique cultures, religions, and art. We Caribbean. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Una travesía para descubrirnos. Buscamos conexiones perdidas.
No nos queda otra que luchar, porque no tenemos nada que perder.
Realmente es por todos.
Recorremos el mundo con Reportajes TeleSUR.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomy. Monday, only on TeleSUR.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on TeleSUR. Who's moving the chessmen? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on TeleSUR. The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. TeleSUR documentaries. Sundays, only on TeleSUR. We share your feelings, exalt your accomplishments, and show your reality. Our approach is global and keeps us in tune with the peoples. Caribbean countries also get our signal. With enthusiasm, we will continue to broadcast for them. Because we are TeleSUR, the news broadcaster from South America and the Caribbean.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life, Fridays, only on TeleSUR.
Greetings, travelers of knowledge. Welcome to Atomum, program of science and technology of TeleSUR. I am Jack Bravo. It's a pleasure to meet with you. Remember that you can follow us on our social networks like Facebook, Atomum TeleSUR, on Twitter as @Atomum TeleSUR, and you can also follow my social network in Twitter. Now join me in reviewing the techno-scientific log that we prepare for you on this journey. Let's see. Chapter of Atomum, our cognitive block, leads us to delve into some implications regarding the measurements of power between Washington and Silicon Valley, but more specifically in the battle of Trump and Twitter, a new canati within the tycoon's fairly complex relationship with the digital platform of the Bluebird. But who puts the bell on the cat of the so-called freedom of expression on social media? A question that we will highlight in this episode of Atomum. The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, continues his policy of neglecting and trivializing the pandemic by COVID-19. The scientific community of the South American giant remains alert and does not abandon his effort to seek mechanisms of attention to his compatriots. So scientists from the state of Sao Paulo are developing rapid and inexpensive tests with a view to expanding the ability to diagnose COVID-19. It's a screening test that uses innovative technology which has not been done anywhere in the world. We have even filed a patent. The advantage of this technology is that every time the sequencing machine is used, 1.536 exams can be carried out at once. The accuracy of the test is 100%, combined with offering not only an economic advantage because its price will be around $45 per unit. Due to the impossibility of making face-to-face visits, the product of the pandemic by COVID-19 in some hospitals in Mexico City have implemented the use of technology, more specifically of devices such as tablets and cell phones to give certainty, a closeness, even virtual to patients through video calls with their relatives. Video calls are a communication strategy that is subject to the ability of several factors, including the patients being able to speak without intubation and without being sedated, as well as that there are unoccupied medical personnel and have time to manipulate the phone, and that calls are scheduled and handled. Initially, a team of researchers developed tools to scan infections such as COVID-19 with the help of artificial intelligence. It is a resource implemented in the manner of scanning by a multidisciplinary team of teachers and engineering students of the National Institute of Applied Science and Technology of the African country, who deploy devices used to scan lung X-ray and assess whether patients are likely to suffer from COVID-19, all through a virtual platform that allows diagnosis to be obtained. In the Republic of China, the virtual reality industry has endured a series of swings typical of market behaviors, yet technological advancements in this field on the rise of the Asian giant. In the last 10 years, the computer capabilities of China and the hardware equipment of the industry have developed exponentially, and what at one time seemed like a dream has become a reality. Hence, experts expect the virtual reality industry to grow even more in China. American entrepreneurs have developed a hot mixing asphalt technology which tends to cool and harden quickly within haul trucks and during the paving process, reducing paving temperatures by to up 100 degrees, while at the same time facilitating application and meeting the required technical specifications. The modern pavement has already been successfully tested on the airport runway on North Base Island, a territory of 700 hectares on the coast of Ohio, which maintain a single essential runways for its inhabitants. Promoters of a modern technology aspire that this type of paving can be used in runway projects, taxiways, and airport platforms around the world. Nancy Drew, Midnight in Salem. If you like adventure games and horror narrative, then we invite you to join a new chapter of the Nancy Drew saga, who in this occasion decides to truly investigate the mystery of Salem, a city of the north coast of Massachusetts, north of Boston in the United States, and which is famous for the witchcraft trials of the year 1692, in which several locals were executed for the alleged practice of witchcraft. Drew's investigation has a point of view the arson of the Hawthorne estate, originally built by Judge John Hawthorne, inquisitor of the infamous trials of Salem witches. Nancy's convictions are put to the test and, of course, yours, in a race against time to the cheaper various issues before midnight. For example, whether ghosts are real, whether the dark story of Salem has come to life, or there is someone else to blame. Make America Great Again was the Trump campaign harangue to mark what for him is the political, economic, social, and cultural course of the United States. The application of this idea not only brought the resemirement of psychopolitics and the use of technology through algorithms and platforms of digital social networks used to position speeches with supposedly democratic ting, but also a dialect loaded with high neoliberal content typical of the new scenarios of transnational territory where corporations try to set the new direction and world order. But Trump's belligerent discourse and his love relationship hatred with technological feudal have been accentuated in times of pandemic, opted for the tycoon's re-election claims. This time the new bid between Trump and Twitter lies between what he sees censorship of freedom of expression and control of content monopolized by the technological feudals of Silicon Valley and its business structure often uncomfortable for their interest of the presiding tycoon. On May 28 of this year, when Trump decided to sign the executive order to make changes to Section 230 of the federal law, known as the Communication Decency Law, which offered immunity to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Google to protect them from any illegal action related to content posted by third parties. In addition to giving him freedom to intervene on the platforms. The trigger in the controversy with Twitter is that the company hid a Trump tweet because it contains violates the rules of the social network of glorified violence.
We're here today to defend free speech from one of the gravest dangers it has faced in American history, frankly. And a small handful of powerful social media monopolies controls a vast portion of all public and private communications in the United States and had unchecked power to censor, restrict, edit, shape, hide, alter virtually any form of communication between private citizens or large public audiences. The choices that Twitter makes when it chooses to suppress, edit, blacklist, shadow, ban are editorial decisions, pure and simple. They're editorial decisions. What they choose to fact check and what they choose to ignore or even promote is nothing more than a political activism. Can't let it happen. Can't let it happen. Otherwise, we're not going to have a democracy. We're not going to have anything to do with a republic.
What are the most relevant aspects immersed in this trope-changing legal instrument, given the alleged threat to democracy by Silicon Valley monopolies as the American representative emphasizes? Here is the significance of this legal instrument. Section 230 of the Act of Decency in Communications dates back in 1996. Is considered a historical piece of Internet law by the United States, grants immunity from liability to providers and users of an interactive computer service that publish information provided by third-party users. To be offered these immunity benefits, it is due to tend to these three parameters. 1. The defendant must be a supplier or user of an interactive computer service. The cause of action asserted by the applicant must be treat the accused as the publisher or speaker of the harmful information in question. 3. The information must be provided by another information content provider. It means the accused should not be the information content provider or the harmful information in question. Section 230 has been a source of controversy because several courts have interpreted as providing full immunity for ESPs with respect to wrongdoing commitment by their users through their system. Among the cases of law or high points are defamatory information, false information, sexual explicit content, and minors treats discrimination, lack of warning, although experts emphasize that disinformation dissemination is a key issue for Facebook, Twitter, and other social media since it was reported that the campaigns of the 2016 US elections and the referendum of Brexit were allegedly intervened by the Russian intelligence services. That claim was not confirmed, as was the information of the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The truth is that in this confrontation, Facebook tries to wash its hands to keep his pedigree inside the digital panoptic, even if on itself weighs the scandal of Cambridge Analytica and the use of data of its user for political purposes.
I don't think that Facebook or internet platforms in general should be arbiters of truth. I think that's a kind of a dangerous line to get down to in terms of deciding what is true and what isn't.
Currently, social media companies are not responsible for the content published by their users. They receive immunity for deleting questionable content, acting as well as selective censors of what they believe is publicized or not. In a long struggle between Washington and Silicon Valley, the Twitter thing is just a grain of sand on the bank of Trump's confrontation from his arrival to power against technological feudals. McCarthyism is a doctrine based on accusations or subversion of disloyal spread that is carried out without respect for the rights of the accused individual and without the development of a fair trial. The concept derives from Joseph McCarthy, Republican political leader of the United States Senate between 1947 and 1957, representing the state of Wisconsin. McCarthy unsubstantiated and accused numerous opponents of the U.S. government, encouraging irregular processes and even the establishment of a blacklist, where according to this, they were communist or Soviet agents infiltrating various spheres of the state and public life. Continue with more science, technology, and innovation at the service of the people. This is Atomum. Now I invite you to learn about the news and research that revolves around the always enigmatic and fascinating universe. From the Jiuquan Center, Chinese Satellite Launch Center launched a new Earth observation satellite. It is the Gaofen 903, a fleet of civil Earth observation satellites developed and launched for the CHIOS State Program or High Definition Land Observation System of China. The satellite will be used mainly in topographical study, urban planning, confirmation of land use right, roadworks design, harvest estimation, as well as disaster prevention and mitigation. The satellite will also provide information for the construction of the Strip and Road Initiative. Lockheed Martin released a video of his most recent test of Orion, the spacecraft that will send astronauts into deep space in NASA's Space Launch System. In early June, he discarded 3 large fairings of service models in the Orion Structural Test article at the company's Waterton Canyon facility near Littleton, Red in the United States. Fairings protect the service model during launch. NASA hopes to launch the Space Launch System on its first test flight, which is estimated to be in early 2021. The telecommunication engineer and writer Philippe Couillou. Virtual reality will allow us to enter and navigate within the image. Before, the image served to transform the world. Now the virtual image is the world. And on the basis of this claim, in China, hospital residents train with virtual reality goggles to practice with COVID-19 patients, where they evaluate skills and learn from their mistakes, without this implying any risk to their health. The pandemic of the new coronavirus has led to innovation becoming a new front to combat the COVID-19, so virtual reality has also been part of the actions to train medical personnel who are on the front line of battle. And although it seems difficult to believe, at the Taipei Hospital Zhuxin in China, resident physicians train with virtual reality goggles to practice with patients' care by COVID-19, evaluate skills and learn from their mistakes without any risk to their health and the patients to be treated. I feel that with practice I can memorize the procedure of the work, and when I treat a real patient I can be more careful with their feelings and focus on their symptoms. It won't stop paying attention to protecting myself. I believe that the use of this training system will allow me to improve the quality of my treatment, focus on my diagnosis, or even the choice of medicines. I won't have to worry about not wearing enough gloves or if I've put my mask inside out. The virtual environment allows medical students to take a medical sample from the patient's throat as if they were a real patient and use the system right-handedly as if it were mastering a video game. The greatest advantage is that the student does not need the physical presence of a teacher. Students just need to know how to use the system, and the system is the teacher. You can learn with this system anytime you want. We can also have a team of 2 or 3 other students to take care of the same patient. I will only need another 2 or 3 games of this device. Then students can learn to take care of the patients at the same time. The alternative of using virtual reality technology allows the progressive learning of medical personnel who work tirelessly at the time when medical services around the world cooperate to treat patients with coronavirus, a palpable display of how innovation is no longer hard to believe when it is put at the service of humanity. The outbreak of the pandemic by the new coronavirus has not only given free rein to a wave of infodemic and an ecosystem of fake news, but laid bare the neglect of neoliberal rulers with their connationals people. Trump tweets to Twitter actions only stoke public discussions about whether it is essential to moderate the content of digital social platforms. A study by the journal Science entitled The Dissemination of True and Fake News Online, dated on March 2018. The greater likelihood that people will retort falsehood more than the truth is what drives the spread of fake news, despite the network and the individual factors that favor truth. Therefore, it is essential to educate the population, especially the users of these digital platforms, to think more critically about what they read, and so we put end to this interesting chapter of Atom. Do not forget to follow us on our accounts. On Twitter, we are at TeleSUR, on Facebook, TeleSUR, and my Twitter is at TeleSUR. See you next time, travelers of knowledge.
Y será hasta una nueva travesía cognitiva. Nos vemos en una próxima ocasión, viajeros y viajeras del saber.
إنه يوم حزين. بيروت منكوبة. لبنان مصاب بكارثة. نعم. إنها كارثة وطنية كبرى. المشاهد التي نراها تعبر عن المأساة وتحكي عن حجم المصيبة التي ضربت لبنان. بيروت ثكلى، لبنان كله اليوم منكوب.
为了保持身体健康，我冥想。
Para mantenerme saludable, yo corro.
To keep myself healthy, I study.
Για να διατηρηθώ υγιής, τρέφομαι σωστά.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo bailo.
Para mantenerme saludable, yo purifico mi espíritu a través del cuerpo. ¿Y tú?
Get Your Body. Tuesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Sonriendo entre los feroces arquitectos de zarpazos, señal que no pierde el paso, amplificando otras voces.
Las voces desobedientes, mestizas de ese salobre, indio, campesino y pobre, más humano que clientes.
Semiótica que entra al juego desde la piel del sufrido, júbilo que bajo fuego más se yergue convencido, ni sudaca con espuelas,
ni parlante mal nacido, negativas verdaderas ante el falso positivo.
La espada de Bolívar otra vez se alzó, se levanta nuestra voz. Soy como tú eres como yo, se levanta nuestra voz. Nuestro norte es el sur, nuestro sur tu corazón, se levanta nuestra voz. Entérate, despiértate, nuestra voz. Las plazas con las abuelas se van llanto de cenizas, deshielos que van deprisa, glaciares de viejas penas. Continente de maíz, de quinoa, soya y arroz, curándose el hambre atroz que anclaron en su raíz. Caravana de migrantes corrigiendo con los pies los geométricos sangrantes cálculos de tan cortés.
Periodismo compañero del estudiante sangrando, ojos que siguen mirando de frente al carabinero.
Y ven los 7 colores del agua y pala, se levanta nuestra voz. La hierba buena, la hierba mala, se levanta nuestra voz. Se perdona todo, pero no se olvida nada. Nuestra voz, nuestra voz. La sola de Bolívar otra vez se alzó, se levanta nuestra voz. Soy como tú eres como yo, se levanta nuestra voz. Nuestro norte es el sur, nuestro sur tu corazón, se levanta nuestra voz. Despiértate, entérate, nuestra voz.
A sol se levanta e canta na dança passada por nós quando ainda criança, ciranda dos povos, na ginga dos corpos, palafitas, mocambos, quilombos, favelas. O povo resiste na tardia, na falsa abolição. Todas pimentas dos oprimidos pela colonização. Povo de luta nas trincheiras da nova guerra social. De acabou, vive na mata, busca alimento pra alma, fazendo a caça, acertando a flecha na cega.
Sépase que la verdad hay que saber defenderla o nos vuelven a estafar con cristales y linternas.
Manipulación mediática, maltratando las conciencias, por si el lucro no descansa, pues que nuestro amor no duerma.
En otro punto de vista, las venas abiertas del continente, compromiso con la vida, somos señal insurgente,
donde lo vilipendiado se descubre por valiente.
compromiso con la vida, somos señal insurgente. La espada de Bolívar otra vez se alzó, compromiso con la
What interests